Now we're going to look at, we've been going through the first half of the tribulation. We've already had the seal judgments. Now we're in the trumpet judgments. So if you think about it, that's 14 judgments within a 3.5 year period. Now the seal judgments, if you remember from when we went through them last week, a lot of that was man-made sort of stuff. Wars, famine, that resulted, the result of the wars, diseases, which are a result of wars, these sort of things. But these next 7, actually next 14, are completely God-centered. Because the things that happen, if you've already read this, you'll know that only God can do what's about to happen on earth in this time frame. It's a bad period of time. Matter of fact, it's so bad, Jesus said, if it isn't cut short, there'll be no flesh left. And as we go through this, you'll see, we get there toward the end, you'll find out that by the time these 7 judgments pass, over half of the world's population will be dead. Think about that. Half of the world's population gone. That's a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of loss, a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow. In this first judgment, this first trumpet is just God. I mean, it's a God thing. There's no way that this can be manufactured any other way. I don't know if you call it a thunderstorm or what you call it, because the very first trumpet judgment is hail, fire, and blood falling from heaven. There's no other way than to say God did this. I mean, we could, in the wars or famine or stuff like that, you say, oh, that was man-made. If we would have taken better care of the environment, blah, blah, blah. But in this case, it's God, and God alone. And in this storm, I guess that's the only thing you could call it would be a storm, 1/3 of all the trees and grass are destroyed. Think about that. 1/3 of all the trees are gone on the earth. Now, when I think of that, 1/3 of all the trees and 1/3 of all the grass are gone. What do trees provide for us that we have to have? Oxygen. There's something else that they provide. Shade. You think, well, shade ain't that big a deal. But the cooling effect of trees is a big deal when you don't have any trees. And they're going to lose 1/3 of the trees. And it's not just hail and fire that do this. There's blood. It rains blood from heaven. I mean, I've never seen, you've seen muddy rain. But blood? And that's just the first one. That's just God saying, hey, it's time to get your attention. The second trumpet, something like a great mountain, is how John describes it, falls from the heavens. So today we would know that'd be a meteor falling to the earth. And it falls into the sea. Okay, now keep in mind, we have 1/3 of the trees and grass are gone. This meteorite falls into the ocean, Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean, who knows? It falls into one of the great bodies of water. And 1/3 of the ships are missing. It wipes out 1/3 of the ships. It wipes out 1/3 of the fish. And 1/3 of the sea becomes blood. Okay. Think about this. We've lost 1/3 of the ocean. 1/3 of the ocean is now contaminated. 1/3 of the ships at sea are lost. There's a crew on that ship. How many people are going to die? All of them. You're right. So 1/3. How many ships are at sea right now? Let's consider cruise lines and freighter ships and oil tankers and all these things. And 1/3 of the fish. Now it just says fish. So I wonder if that includes the air-breathing fish. But either way, 1/3 are gone. How many of you have ever had a tuna salad sandwich? Imagine all the tuna gone. How many of you have ever had haddock or walleye? Imagine all that's gone. A third of it just, and a third of the ocean is blood. So it's contaminated. That's the first two. Third trumpet, a star called wormwood falls to the earth like a burning torch. So we've had hail, fire, and blood, a meteorite, and since this one is described like a burning torch falling to earth, I'm thinking this might be a comet. Just because you see the big trail on a comet. And John describes them different. This first one is a great mountain that's with fire, so it's more like a rock. This one is like a burning torch, so it doesn't have that core, so it'd be more like a comet, I think. I could be wrong. But it falls on the earth, on ground, breaks up. How it does it, I don't know. But it hits the earth, and a third of all the rivers and springs turn bitter and poisonous. Okay? So that's why I'm thinking comet, because it hits the atmosphere and goes, explodes, and sends out the poison gas, particulate of whatever, out into the atmosphere, then it falls down to the earth and poisons a third of the rivers and springs.
Would it be radiation?
It could be radiation. It could be some sort of atmospheric poison that we don't know about. It could be sulfur. Anything that would ruin a third of the springs and a third of the fresh water. Okay. We got one more natural disaster, if you will. And that fourth trumpet, when that blows, a third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars are struck dark. Now, we're not talking just like an eclipse that happens over a few hours over a particular part of the country. If you guys remember that last eclipse, what did the temperature drop? 20 degrees during the eclipse? 15 degrees? You know, imagine for an extended period of time a third of the sun. So the earth is receiving a third of the heat that it normally would. Or a third of it's taken away. So it's only getting 2/3. A third of the moon is darkened. A third of the stars are darkness. It kind of makes you remember, it shows, you know, from Exodus when God done that in the Egyptian plagues. So, at the end of this trumpet, we have a third of the ocean, a third of the trees and grass, a third of the fresh water, and a third of the sun and moon and stars. That is an ecological disaster of, well, biblical proportion. But that's just the first 4. There's still 3 more judgments to come. And we're still within the first half of the tribulation period. That 7 to 10 year period. And it gets worse. Believe it or not, it gets worse. Because the 5th trumpet is described as the first woe. Remember whenever we hear the word woe in the Bible? Woe is me, woe unto the inhabitants. It's horrific. Something terrible happens. And in this case, something extremely terrible happens. You gotta remember, you're living with a third of all these things missing. And then, an angel is released from the Euphrates. He goes down, he opens up the bottomless pit, and locusts, like scorpion kind of creatures, come flying out. 200 million of them. And for 5 months, go around the planet stinging people. And it gets very, very particular as to what happens. Now, in those days, it says, men will seek for death and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The sting is so painful, so debilitating, that people will pray to God to die. And they won't. And it, go ahead.
If they pray to God, then they know God, right?
Most of them do. Most people will, at this point, will know God, because they've already, in the first judgment, you remember, they prayed to God that the mountains would fall on them to save them from the wrath of the Lamb. But yet they continue to refuse. They just refuse. We are not accepting God as Lord. And that's what they're going to be in this case too. In this case, it's very, very particular. It's only a certain group of people that get stung. And it says, those men who do not have the seal of God on their forehead. If you don't have the seal of the Holy Spirit at this time, you're going to get stung. And for 5 months, you're going to be in such torment that you're going to beg to die and won't be able to die. Now, this is not just a random thing. They have a particular angel, if you will, or a principality over them. And they give us his name. His name in Hebrew is Abandon. Abandon. I know I'm not saying it right. And then the Greek is Apollon. And all those names, both of them mean destroyer. So these things aren't just randomly doing whatever. They're actually under a specific control for a specific time with a specific task. It's not just some random thing that's going on. And like I said, it's just the unsaved, the unregenerate, the ones that are hell-bent, if you will, on serving the Antichrist. They're the only ones that get stung. And they make an interesting point here that during this 5 months, you got to remember that the 144,000 Jews are out proselytizing. They're preaching and teaching. And they made an interesting point here that this might slow the Antichrist and all his minions and all his people up for 5 months for them to continue to convert those that may or may not be converted. It gives them a 5-month window to continue to preach the gospel that they would not normally have. Because at this point, you guys remember from the one world religion, they're hunting Christians down at a pretty rapid pace. And then we get to the 6th trumpet. Trumpet of woe, another woe. And this one, I'm sorry, the first one was a bottomless pit. This one was actually the 4 angels bound at the Euphrates. And they muster 200 million horsemen to kill another third of mankind with plagues, fire, smoke, brimstone. That's a lot. Here we are, another third. Not counting all those who are dying by natural causes, dying from the diseases, dying from the starvation, dying from being Christian because you're being martyred. Another third is killed with these 200 horsemen. And then they make a case, because there's 200 million troops mentioned twice. Once in Revelation 9 where we're at, and once in Revelation 16. And they make a case and draw out that these are 2 different armies, because it's at 2 specifically different times, and these particular ones come from a particular area. They come from hell, because they are bound at the Euphrates River. And this trumpet happens in the middle of the tribulation. The next 200 million happens in Revelation 16. That 200 million goes to Israel to fight against God. These start out in that area and spread out throughout the whole world. The second army has a particular task going in a particular direction. And I think what year did they say it was? That the Time article said that China could muster 200 million people on its own. But that included every man, woman, and child. And like I said, these 2 armies have different tasks. These 4 angels that release the 200 horsemen go out, 200 million horsemen go out and cause this. They are particularly attacking random people. Not, I won't say random, but you know what I mean, they're attacking. These that are in Revelation 16, they go to Israel, to the valley of Armageddon to fight against Christ. So it's 2 different armies. And they make the case that this first group is a demonic horde, which very well could be by what they're doing. That they have supernatural power, that they're on horses and still get all the way around the world. I don't know, maybe their horses ride across water, who knows. But there are 2 different armies. So when we read that, we need to keep in mind that that's 2 different armies, 2 different time frames, with 2 different purposes. Their purpose is to just go out and kill. Second army's purpose is to go to Israel and fight against God. Doesn't work out for either army in the end. 7th trumpet, another woe. So that's 3 woes now. in a series of divine judgments. Seventh trumpet itself is not so much a judgment as it was with the seventh seal. The seventh seal opened up the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet opens up the period of the Great Tribulation for the next seven disasters, the next seven, which are the bowls or vials, however you want to call it, where God literally pours wrath on to the earth. But it's not all bad. See, because what it says here is those that are in heaven are actually worshiping. Do you see that toward the last page, 220? It says, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and they shall reign forever and ever. There's great rejoicing and worship in heaven because God is winning. God is finally taking things back, if you will. Now, these seven happen fairly quickly, and as you can tell, by the time we're done with this, over half at this point of the world's population, because we've had judgments and the seals and trumpets that wiped out, you say a quarter and then another third. So at this point, we're over half the world's population is gone. That have died through disasters, diseases, war, conflict, starvation, plague. Remember, even the beasts of the field start attacking people. So, there's going to be a lot of death. Any questions over these seven trumpets?
Do you think that it'll be, like it says, a third specific geographical, it hits Asia or hits
I
US,
I really don't know, because you would think that when wormwood hits and it scatters, or when a meteor hits and scatters, that it would be a particular spot in the Pacific Ocean or a particular group of rivers, like say in the eastern continents, where North America and South America would be spared. But it doesn't say. It could hit the atmosphere and be like a volcano and just spread around, and this creek be destroyed, but 2 creeks down be good. I don't know how that's going to work for positive, because it doesn't really say that God's going to pick particular rivers or pick particular trees. Because if it hit, like say northern Canada, or right there before the tundra line, almost half the world's trees are right there in northern Canada, and as well as northern Russia, just before we get to the North Pole. So if it hit that meteor or whatever, hit one of those areas, it could wipe out. Or you could even go south into the Amazonian rainforest and wipe out a third of the trees of the world in one particular spot. How he's going to do it, I don't know. And how he's going to pick which springs and which ocean gets hit with that meteor, it doesn't say. It just says that a third are going to be wiped out. It could hit in the Indian Ocean and take out probably a third of the ships, or in the Pacific, just because of the trade from the Orient back to the Europe and back to, North and South America. So either way, you could wipe out a lot. But how he's going to do it in exact geographic spot doesn't really say.
Well, think of the tsunami.
Yeah, that took out, how many was that?
I don't know.
It was millions.
This would be a massive tsunami if it hits, the water.
Yeah, I would think so.
Send it away.
I would think that it would, because it talks about when the sun and the moon are struck, how the ocean just kind of goes nuts at this point. Because if they're struck, the tidal currents and tidal would be just off. Any other questions?
What's the significance of the Euphrates?
The Euphrates is mentioned a lot throughout the Bible. Euphrates is mentioned, and actually, we're not done with Euphrates. Euphrates is going to get dried up here in the second half, so that army from the Orient can march to Israel. So that Euphrates isn't done. I don't know why God has used the Euphrates so much, but the Euphrates has always been a natural barrier between East and West. It's mentioned, actually Euphrates is mentioned in Genesis. So from Genesis forward all the way to the book of Revelation, Euphrates and Tigris are mentioned. That particular fertile crescent It's always there, kind of like Israel and Egypt. They're always in the Bible. And they have significant roles throughout all of mankind's history. I don't know if that's just because it's one of the first rivers mentioned, but it stays significant throughout.
Thank you.
No. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for it, but it's significant. Any other questions? All right, then. Okay, we can be dismissed and have a half hour of fellowship fun, I guess, since we're done a little early. And next week, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. I'll have to take a look at the chapter to see if we can actually. No, I'm going to say no. We are not going to be able to get through that whole chapter next week. So we'll probably do a little something different next week, so that way when I get back, we can start right back here in this particular chapter. All right, you guys have